Hope you won't hold it against me, but I am a hard coal miner. Anthracite coal, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Okay, that's where I was born and raised. And it's nice to be back in coal country.
That was Joe Biden in 2008 describing his many years underground as a coal miner in the hills of northeastern Pennsylvania. That's been 12 years he managed to survive black lung. He's also changed his perspective on energy.
Today, I'm pleased to announce a team that will lead my administration's ambitious plan to address the existential threat of our time, climate change. Folks, we're in a crisis. Just like we need to be a unified nation in response to COVID-19, we need a unified national response to climate change. And from this crisis, from these crises, I should say, we need to seize the opportunity to build back and build back better than we were before.
From this crisis, we must seize the opportunity. Marc Morano publishes Climate Depot. We're happy to have him on tonight. Marc, thanks so much for joining us. If you look at the polling on this subject, there are a lot of crises unfolding in the United States right now. Climate change is not one that rates very high on most people's lists of pressing concerns, but the Biden people believe it's the central crisis. What do they plan to do to respond to it, if you could sum up for us?
Well, first of all, in polling, the Harris CEO of Harris Polling lamented that climate went from a top-tier issue in his poll to second to last of all issues in this past year. They're freaked out that no one is talking and no one cares about climate among the public. But what they're trying to do, and you saw Biden allude to it there with Build Back Better, they are trying to essentially use the COVID lockdown model for the climate emergency model. And they're going to go from COVID lockdowns to climate lockdowns. And if you look at it, Senator Merkel came out today and is urging a President Joe Biden to declare a national climate emergency, which would give him emergency powers and he could bypass democracy, much the same way a lot of the blue state governors have done with the COVID lockdowns.
Kind of confused on the most basic level. So we've had warming and cooling periods since the Earth itself cooled. We've had a number of ice ages, and then warming periods after. So if you accept that we're in a warming period, and I'm willing to believe that, why are we certain it's human caused and therefore reversible and not just yet another warming or cooling period? Honestly.
Well, a lot of this goes back to the United Nations. In 1988, they started their climate panel, and their every incentive was to say, not only is carbon dioxide a control knob, but it's causing a problem. They get to come up with the scare of CO2, and they get to come up with the solution as well. But if you look at the data, when people say, oh, well, the UN has determined that most of the warming since 1950 is human, that's determined by a show of hands. It's not some scientific paper. It's based on models and speculation, expert judgment, which we've seen in the COVID, how much expert judgment can matter sometimes. It can be wildly off. But, you can talk to geologists who study the history of the Earth, and they will tell you that we are in the 10% coldest period of the Earth, geologically speaking. 90% of the Earth's history didn't have ice on either pole. So most of the scare comes in predictions of the future, and that's what the UN and the climate scaremongers like to focus on.
Do you think the average person knows that we've had innumerable, probably literally countless warming periods over the eons, and they've all been naturally occurring? I never hear anybody say that, and I've never heard anybody present actual proof that this is different from those, ever. I've never heard anybody do that. Why?
There isn't. In peer-reviewed studies, you go back to the Roman warming period, down to about 0 AD. You go to the medieval warming period. You could argue the temperature's been the same or slightly declined since those periods, depending on what study, what proxies you want to do. The reason is they needed an emergency. Here's the bottom line, Tucker. For decades, UN climate activists and climate campaigners and Al Gore have toiled for attention and government action. They failed when Obama was president to get cap and trade. They failed multiple times. What's happened is COVID has opened their eyes. They went from jealousy to now they're learning from it to now they're all in on the COVID model. So I went to UN conferences for 2 decades. They talked about planned recessions in order to fight global warming, degrowth movement. And now, what is a lockdown but a planned recession by the government? So the climate activists are all in on this COVID model. Climate lockdowns coming from COVID lockdowns. And that's exactly what Joe Biden's being advised to do.
Boy, I wish I could dismiss what you just said as a conspiracy theory, but given everything we've seen, I can't.
It's their
I mean,
words.
it does seem that way. Mark, thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Tucker. Appreciate it.
This will not be the last story we do on this.